This final part pulls everything together. We'll look at how behavior operates across time, settings, and situations, and why lasting change depends on more than just short term reinforcement. Concepts like generalization, maintenance, and motivating operations help explain why some behavior changes stick and others fade. Understanding this complexity prepares us to move from basic principles to real world application. Not all behavior is shaped directly by contacting consequences. Humans have a unique ability to learn through language, and this creates an important distinction between rule governed behavior and contingency shaped behavior. Rule governed behavior occurs when a person's actions are controlled by verbal descriptions of contingencies rather than by direct experience with reinforcement or punishment. For example, someone may follow a posted sign that says wet floor and walk carefully without ever slipping. The behavior is controlled by the rule, not by the personal contact with the consequence. This allows humans to behave effectively in situations where direct experience would be dangerous, inefficient, or impossible. In contrast, contingency shaped behavior develops through repeated exposure to consequences. Behavior is gradually selected based on what happens after it occurs. While this process can be slower, it often produces behavior that is more sensitive to changes in actual contingencies. Rule governed behavior adds complexity to human behavior because it can sometimes override direct contingencies. Understanding the difference between these two processes is essential for analyzing why people behave the way they do in applied setting. One of the most consistent findings in behavior analysis is the importance of immediacy. Consequences that occur immediately after behavior have a much stronger effect than those that are delayed. This principle applies to both reinforcement and punishment. When a consequence closely follows a response, it is easier for the organism to detect the relation between the behavior and its outcome. As delays increase, that connection weakens. Delayed consequences rarely function as direct reinforcement unless they are mediated by complex verbal and social histories. This explains why many long term outcomes, such as health benefits or financial security, often fail to control behavior effectively. Even though the outcomes may be important, they are too delayed to exert strong control without additional supports. Immediate consequences, on the other hand, shape behavior efficiently. They help explain habits, routines, and patterns that persist even when people intellectually know better. Understanding this principle helps behavior analysts design interventions that bring consequences closer in time to the behavior, increasing the likelihood of meaningful change. Operant conditioning does not require awareness. Behavior can be strengthened or weakened by consequences even when the individual cannot describe the contingency or recognize that learning has occurred. This feature is known as the automaticity of reinforcement. People often assume that insight or understanding must come before behavior change. However, behavior analysis shows that learning frequently occurs without conscious awareness. A person may adjust behavior simply because certain actions consistently produce desirable or undesirable outcomes. This principle helps explain why habits form so easily and why behavior can persist even when individuals cannot articulate why they do what they do. It also explains why behavior change programs do not need to rely on explanation or persuasion to be effective. Automaticity highlights the importance of environmental arrangements. If contingencies are in place, behavior will change regardless of whether the individual understands the process. This reinforces the scientific focus on observable relations rather than internal explanation. By recognizing that learning occurs automatically, behavior analysts can design interventions that work with rather than against natural learning processes. Consequences rarely affect behavior in only one way. A single stimulus change can have immediate effects on current behavior while also producing delayed effects on future behavior. Understanding these multiple functions is essential for accurate analysis. For example, a loud noise may immediately suppress behavior while also conditioning emotional responses that influence future behavior in similar situations. Similarly, a reinforcer may strengthen a behavior while also altering the individual's sensitivity to related stimuli. These overlapping effects highlight why behavior analysis emphasizes functional relationships rather than cause and effect explanations. What matters is not just that a consequence occurred, but how it functions within a specific context. Because consequences can have complex and interacting effects, behavior analysts must be cautious when interpreting behavior change. What looks like a simple increase or decrease may reflect multiple processes operating at once. Recognizing the layered effects of consequences helps prevent oversimplification and supports more effective intervention planning. It reminds us that behavior exists within a dynamic system of interacting variables rather than isolated events. Consequences can be delivered by other people or occur without social involvement. Social mediated consequences involve another person providing the consequences, such as attention, praise, or reprimands. These contingencies are especially important in human behavior. In contrast, automatic contingencies occur when behavior produces its own consequences directly without the involvement of others. Sensory stimulation, relief from discomfort, or physical feedback can all function automatically. Understanding this distinction is critical in applied settings. If behavior is maintained by social consequences, interventions may focus on altering social responses. If behavior is maintained automatically, different strategies are required because removing social attention may have little effect. Automatic contingencies help explain behaviors that persist even when others attempt to ignore them. They also illustrate why some behaviors are difficult to change using social interventions alone. By identifying whether contingencies are socially mediated or automatic, behavior analysts can better match intervention strategies to the actual variables, maintaining behavior, increasing the likelihood of successful outcomes. Two closely related processes help explain how behavior adapts across situations: discrimination and generalization. Discrimination occurs when behavior comes under the control of specific stimuli. Generalization occurs when behavior extends beyond the original training conditions. Through discrimination, organisms learn when a behavior will be reinforced and when it will not. This leads to precise and efficient responding. For example, a student learns to raise a hand in class but not during recess. Generalization, on the other hand, allows behavior to occur across new settings, people, or stimuli. This flexibility is essential for adaptive functioning. Without generalization, behavior would remain tied to narrow conditions. Both processes depend on reinforcement history. Discrimination develops when reinforcement is differently available. Generalization occurs when similar conditions share functional properties. Understanding discrimination and generalization helps behavior analysts design interventions that promote appropriate flexibility while maintaining control. The goal is not rigid responding, but behavior that adapts effectively across real-world environments while still being sensitive to relevant cues. Behavior change is only meaningful if it lasts. Maintenance refers to the persistence of behavior over time after formal intervention has ended. This concept is essential in applied behavior analysis. Maintenance depends heavily on whether behavior continues to contact reinforcement in the natural environment. If reinforcement disappears entirely, behavior is unlikely to persist. This highlights the importance of selecting target behaviors that are naturally reinforced. Intermittent reinforcement schedules often play a role in maintenance. Behaviors occasionally rather than continuously tend to be more resistant to extinction. This principle explains why many everyday behaviors persist without frequent reinforcement. Maintenance is not automatic. It must be planned for deliberately by ensuring that reinforcement systems gradually resemble natural conditions. Without this planning, behavior may fade once structured supports are removed. Understanding maintenance reinforces the broader theme of this chapter. Behavior is shaped by environmental relations over time. Lasting change occurs when those relations continue to support the behavior beyond the intervention context. Motivating operations play a critical role in determining how effective consequences will be at any given moment. A motivating operations alters the value of a stimulus as a reinforcement or punishment and changes the likelihood of behaviors associated with that stimulus. Deprivation and satiation are classic examples. When food deprivation is high, food becomes a more powerful reinforcer. When satiation occurs, the same food loses its reinforcing value. Motivating operations do not directly reinforce or punish behavior. Instead, they change how much impact consequences will have. This means the same consequence can function very differently depending on current conditions. Recognizing motivating operations helps explain fluctuations in behavior that cannot be accounted for by antecedents or consequences alone. It also helps behavior analysts avoid misinterpreting data when behavior changes unexpectedly. Although motivating operations are examined in greater detail later, introducing them here emphasizes that behavior is influenced by both historical and momentary variables. This adds depth and precision to behavior analysis without abandoning its scientific foundation. Behavior and environment do not exist as isolated events. Instead, they form a continuous stream of interaction. Behavior analysts identify specific slices of this stream for analysis, but it's important to remember that these divisions are analytic tools, not natural boundaries. This perspective helps avoid mentalistic explanations that attribute behavior to internal causes. Thoughts and feelings are part of the behavioral stream, not explanations for it. They are behaviors influenced by the same environmental variables as observable actions. Seeing behavior as continuous encourages analysts to look for functional relations across times rather than single causes. It also reinforces the importance of context in understanding behavior. By focusing on patterns rather than isolated incidents, behavior analysts gain a more accurate picture of how behavior develops and changes. This perspective supports both humility and precision, acknowledging complexity while maintaining scientific rigor. The behavioral stream concept reminds us that analysis is always an approximation of reality, but one that becomes more useful as it remains grounded in observable relations and empirical evidence. The concepts introduced in this chapter form the foundation for everything that follows in applied behavior analysis. Behavior, environment, reinforcement, punishment, stimulus control, and motivating operations are not abstract ideas. They are tools for understanding and improving real world behavior. By defining behavior precisely and analyzing its relations with the environment, behavior analysts can move beyond intuition and assumption. This scientific approach allows for prediction, control, and meaningful change. These concepts also provide a common language. When practitioners share precise definitions, collaboration becomes more effective and interventions become more consistent. This consistency is essential for ethical and effective practice. This chapter closes by acknowledging both the power and the limits of current knowledge. Behavior analysis does not claim to explain everything, but it offers a systematic and expanding framework for understanding behavior. As the book continues, these basic concepts will be revisited, refined, and applied in increasingly complex ways. Mastery of these foundations is essential for anyone seeking to design interventions that are effective, ethical, and grounded in behavioral science.